Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking a totally fascinating and honestly deeply concerning scenario detailed in our source material. We're looking at a hypothetical but heavily grounded 2026 US-Iran conflict. Now we're going to use this incredibly tense geopolitical war game to analyze something very real and very urgent, and that is India's severe vulnerabilities when it comes to global supply chains and energy security. Because, this isn't just about missiles and blockades, it's really about what happens to a neutral nation when the entire world around it just catches fire.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our War Room briefing menu for today. First, the 2026 Gulf crisis. Second, danger in the Strait. Third, diplomacy, India versus Pakistan. Fourth, the oil security trap. And finally, rethinking Indian foreign policy.
Section 1. The 2026 Gulf crisis.
Just look at how fast this whole situation falls apart. We're talking February 28th, the war kicks off. By March 21st, the conflict hits a terrifying escalation point. Iran's nuclear facilities, including the Natanz and Bushehr plants, are targeted. And the source highlights just how disastrous this was. Think about it. If the Bushehr plant had been fully breached, radioactive material would have contaminated the entire Gulf. We're talking about destroying the water supply and marine life. It echoes a Chernobyl-level disaster. Fast forward to April 7th, the U.S. issues this apocalyptic deadline, which surprisingly results in a temporary ceasefire. But then, by April 12th, the peace talks completely collapse, leading to a total U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports.
You really get a sense of the absolute chaos here when you look at a massive event that went down on April 3rd. Iran actually shot down an American F-15E Strike Eagle. The pilot had to eject, hike up to 7,000 feet, hide in a mountain crevice, and literally send out a 3-word radio message, "God is good." What followed was this historic, movie-level rescue mission by Delta Force and Navy SEALs deep inside Iranian territory. And while the rescue was a success, the fallout was severe. The peace talks that followed in Islamabad ultimately failed, mostly over disagreements on Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. So the result? A double blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, first by Iran, then by America, completely choking off one of the most vital global trade routes on the planet.
Moving on to Section 2, Danger in the Strait.
8. Just think about that number. That is the number of Indian-flagged vessels that approached the Strait of Hormuz on a single Saturday during this crisis, only to be forced to abandon their routes and completely turn back because tensions were skyrocketing.
And, this perfectly captures the immediate physical danger of the conflict for neutral countries. On April 18th, 2 Indian-flagged merchant vessels were intercepted while they were literally just trying to cross the strait. One of these was a massive supertanker hauling 2 million barrels of Iraqi oil destined for India. Without any warning, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, gunboats actually opened fire on them. The vessels had to perform emergency U-turns just to escape. So the physical supply chain wasn't just disrupted here, it was actively under attack.
The geopolitical irony here is just staggering. Just months prior, India and Iran were strategic partners. They were collaboratively building the Chabahar port to boost regional trade. And now, India is forced to formally summon the Iranian ambassador to protest IRGC gunboats firing on its commercial ships. It just goes to show how quickly alliances can completely disintegrate when regional survival is on the line.
Section 3. Diplomacy, India versus Pakistan.
Now, it's wild to look at how 2 neighboring countries navigated this sudden explosion of violence completely differently. On the one hand, Pakistan took on an incredibly active mediation role. By leveraging a direct back channel between their army chief, Asim Munir, and U.S. President Donald Trump, Pakistan pulled off a massive diplomatic shocker. They successfully brokered that critical 90-minute to midnight ceasefire on April 7th. But then, on the other hand, look at India's posture. India remained completely on the sidelines during these monumental peace mediations. While they maintained their traditional neutrality, India ultimately found itself in a defensive crouch, basically unable to proactively secure its own merchant vessels or energy interests in the Gulf.
India's official stance on this was firm, though. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar defended the country's position, stating, "Unlike Pakistan, India doesn't want to be the middleman. It's a very clear assertion of India's desire to avoid getting entangled in foreign conflicts. But, as our source analysis points out, this raises a fairly vital question. If you aren't at the negotiating table, are you on the menu?"
Section 4. The oil security trap.
Because the physical route through the Middle East was choked, India had to rely heavily on Russian oil. But there's a massive catch here, a U.S. oil waiver. So what is that? It's basically a temporary, conditional permission slip from Washington. Without it, India would face crippling secondary sanctions, which means the United States would actively penalize Indian businesses and banks globally, literally just for trying to fuel its own economy. The source highlights that India has been forced to repeatedly request this permission from America.
Let's map out the full picture of this trap. First, India's Middle East imports are physically threatened by IRGC gunboats. Cargo is literally being shot at. When you pivot to a backup plan like Russian oil, your strategic vulnerability shifts to a loss of sovereign procurement. You suddenly become entirely reliant on U.S. sanction waivers. And the real kicker? That U.S. waiver isn't permanent. In this scenario, it expires on May 16th, pushing India right toward an impending diplomatic cliff.
So it all really boils down to this crucial point. Why does a massive, emerging global power like India need the United States' permission to secure its own energy? The source presents a pretty sharp critique here. Defending neutrality might make for great political messaging, but does it actually achieve oil security? If you have to beg a foreign power just to keep your lights on, how independent is your foreign policy, really? It forces analysts to ask why alternative energy import strategies or long-term supply diversifications weren't prioritized over banking on temporary U.S. waivers.
Section 5. Rethinking Indian Foreign Policy.
All right, let's connect the dots we've laid out across this whole explainer. Step 1. The physical routes in the Gulf are blocked by a war you can't control. Step 2. Your backup plan, Russian oil, is held hostage by expiring U.S. diplomatic waivers. Step 3. Your strict adherence to neutral diplomacy has basically left you on the sidelines, failing to protect your own sovereign energy rights while your merchant ships are out there being fired upon. The combination of these three factors creates an absolutely critical threat to the nation's economic stability. It is quite literally a perfect storm of vulnerability.
Which leaves us with a massive, lingering question. In a polarized, rapidly escalating world, can a neutral nation survive without truly diversifying its energy and securing its own supply chains? And more importantly, with regional instability rising every single day, is immediate diversification even feasible anymore? Or is the trap already shut? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we continue to break down the complex forces shaping our world.